Hi, we're here with Kartik Hosanagar. He is the author of A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. It's a book that's down to earth, gives you a nice overview of the world of algorithms, and it's a pretty good read. Welcome, Kartik.
Larry, thanks for having me.
So let's, I guess, just give me a high level of the book. I know you talked about, you allude to regulation, transparency. I guess if, somebody's going to get this book, what are some of the big takeaways here?
Well, the big takeaway is pretty much that algorithms, intelligent algorithms, are making a lot of decisions for us in our personal and professional lives. And they have unanticipated consequences, things we don't realize that can go wrong. And when things go wrong, we want to make sure there are the right checks and balances in place. And unless we demand them, and unless we are careful about it and recognize the need for it, it's not going to happen on its own. So mostly it's about what are those checks and balances and who's going to provide it and why we should ask for it. That's essentially what the book is about.
So just to double down on those checks and balances, who do you think is going to provide it? Is this something like, I know IBM's talked about transparency. I know, there's the AI ops movement. There's a lot of things like that talking about production and transparency and things like that. Is this something industry can do? Is it something governments can do? I guess, who do you see doing this exactly?
Well, I think there is a role that industry needs to play. There's a role that consumers need to play. There's a role that governments need to play. All of them need to play a role. And maybe a good starting point might be to talk about what are those problems. And then based on that, we can talk about what each one should do. So if you look at the problems or what's actually happening, first of all, just recognizing that, look at decisions we make. Where are we figuring out the media we consume, newsfeed algorithms on Facebook or on Twitter are determining what news stories we're exposed to. You look at the workplace, who gets hired. There are algorithms helping recruiters shortlist applicants and decide which ones get invited for interviews. There are algorithms for doctors to help them make treatment decisions. There are algorithms used in courtrooms to guide judges in making sentencing and parole decisions. So these algorithms are all around us, and sometimes, who has to play a role depends on which kind of algorithm and where is it being used. So if we talk about algorithms that, for example, social newsfeed algorithms that Facebook and Twitter are using, there's a big role that consumers and firms have to play there. And really the checks and balances there have to do with things like transparency, things like having a human in the loop, some user control. Sometimes we don't even know an algorithm is making a decision for us. We don't know what data the algorithm is using. We don't know how the algorithm makes those decisions. So you apply for a job or you apply for a loan, and an algorithm makes those decisions, and we don't even know about this. And so I think the checks and balances there in that context that I propose are really about transparency in terms of data, in terms of the logic of the algorithm, some simple explanation on what's actually happening here. Or also, some user control. And that user control is needed to help users correct algorithms when they fail. Look at Facebook, for example, where, it had, the fake news controversy that came up during the 2016 elections. And the issue there was that as far as the newsfeed algorithm was concerned, it was not able to detect fake news stories, but users were seeing it. Users were seeing fake news in their newsfeed, but they couldn't do anything about it. Fast forward 2 years, today with 2 clicks, we can let the newsfeed algorithm know that this post is offensive or this post has false information. Turns out that was a crucial feature to help Facebook detect the offensive violent content that was circulating on the network around the New Zealand terror attacks. And it was people who alerted the algorithm and ultimately helped bring down that content fast enough. So these are a few examples, but there's really many others we could be talking about.
In a business context, what do you think like, for instance, Salesforce, right? They talk about they've got Einstein, and that's going to be, using algorithms to tell you what you should do for business. Everybody's got a spin on this stuff. What's the role of algorithms in business, and then how does that transparency work there?
I mean, algorithms are going to be all around business. There's no doubt about it, and it's already, in fact, being rolled out in various ways by companies, and it's only bound to increase because, at the end of the day, you know, powering all these algorithms is machine learning, which is about gathering data, figuring out patterns in the data, and automating various decisions in there. And so, whether it is figuring out which customers get which offers, which customers do you even try and acquire. Once you've acquired customers, who do you focus on retaining, who do you not, who are your best customers, which are your best customer segments, what are the actual promotions and discounts to all of them. All of these kinds of decisions are going to be either made or informed by these algorithms. And so they will, of course, play a huge role in business, whether it's you know, how companies interact with customers, how companies service customers, but also even at the back end as far as supply chain management, supply chain efficiency. So in all of these different aspects, you're going to see intelligent algorithms come in and either automate or augment what people are doing.
Do you anticipate we'll eventually get like an earnings warning because somebody screwed up with their algorithms?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been mentioning in my talks with companies is that we need to start thinking about algorithms as a new, well, of course, a new opportunity, but also a new form of risk to companies. So if you look at Facebook, the amount of its market value that was wiped out because of 2-3 controversies that came up around the same time that ultimately had to do with data and algorithms, privacy issues with Cambridge Analytica, followed by, and around the same time, in fact, issues with fake news on that its algorithms wasn't able to detect. You look more recently at Boeing, 2 crashes, both of them related to the autopilot system at the end of the day, the AI that's powering this, and the algorithms that are actually powering the autopilot system, and the failure there, and it's obviously hurt the stock market value. You're going to have, I think, companies that are making lending decisions using algorithms. It'll come out at some point that these algorithms have a race bias or a gender bias or some bias. That's going to be a huge reputational risk, even a litigation risk. So I think algorithms, while providing a huge amount of opportunity, are also going to pose social, reputational, and litigation risks for companies. And so they will have to approach it from a risk and compliance perspective as well.
So how do you defend against something like discrimination? Because I mean, you can make an algorithm that will, you know, not look at race or something, but then if you layer in other data such as, you know, it could be location, credit score, you could do, you know, you can look at different factors and it adds up to be discriminatory. How do you think we'll eventually get around to governing that?
Yeah, there's been many examples of biases in lending algorithms, recruiting algorithms, even algorithms used in courtrooms in the US that are used to guide judges and parole officers. And at the end of the day, what's clear is just hiding race or gender or other such information from the algorithm will not suffice. As you pointed out, the algorithm will infer some of these attributes because of other things like location or zip code that are correlated to certain things like race. At the end of the day, I think that companies should have an audit process in place for their algorithms and data science. And that audit process will involve treating automated decisions as a new class of decisions that actually need to be audited. And so that involves setting up an audit process. And sometimes that might mean, you know, an audit team that's going to audit the critical algorithms that are making socially consequential decisions. Sometimes that will mean algorithms that are continuously monitoring other algorithms and testing for things like biases and alerting someone and saying, look, based on the decisions made over the last 2 months, I'm noticing there's a problem. It's not actually meeting this test for fairness or bias. And so those kinds of processes will need to be built in.
Do you think we'll get those sort of audits without, you know, some kind of legislation? Sarbanes-Oxley sort of for AI?
Well, for the sake of the industry, I hope they will self-regulate, and I hope they will take action in advance before it's too late and regulators come in with very heavy regulations that will actually make it too burdensome for them. I mean, look at privacy. Industry has ignored this for so long, and then you have EU coming up with something like GDPR, and the industry kept complaining, whoa, that's too onerous and compliance is so burdensome. But the industry didn't take enough action in advance to prevent that. And I think now with automated decisions, they have a chance to again take actions, be proactive, and try and prevent problems. I hope they will take action, but if they won't, I fear and I suspect you're going to see some regulations here.
Okay. The one example in your book that I thought was interesting was the Microsoft algorithm, where they sort of launched a bot in China, and it's sort of caught on and people seem to love it. They use the exact same technology in the US, gets on Twitter and becomes racist in about, I don't know, a few minutes. I guess walk us through those unintended consequences, because it seems like no matter what algorithm we cook up, there's going to be some, I don't know if it's magic, unintended consequences, whatever it is, but it kind of takes on a life of its own. How do we guard against that?
Yeah, so that example I mentioned in the book is of a chatbot Microsoft launched in China known as Xiaobing, also known as Xiaoeyes. And this chatbot had over 40 million followers, and this chatbot was created in the persona of a teenage girl targeted at young adults and teenagers. Huge success in China. They created a chatbot again targeted at young adults and teenagers here in the US, launched it on Twitter. It was called Tay, and it had to be shut down within 24 hours of launch because it ended up being racist, sexist, fascist. And it's interesting that it's two similar algorithms launched by the exact same company have such different outcomes, and it speaks to the unpredictability and the unintended consequences over here of AI. And it comes down to, what are the precise set of checks and balances that are in place to prevent these algorithms from veering? What is the training data used? The training data on Twitter is different than the training data they used in social network in China. And so what is actually, it's a similar approach, but those minor details matter because, again, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if your training data is problematic, it's going to learn from that. So when you look at biases in recruiting, let's say, and there were examples, there was a news story last year about Amazon trying to use a resume screening application, and their internal tests showed that it had a gender bias. That's because it's actually trying to look at data on how the company might have made decisions on who to hire, who to promote, and if there are biases in human decisions, the algorithm that is automating those human decisions will have biases as well. Fortunately, Amazon detected it and apparently shut down the project or stopped using that. There was also a study that showed algorithms in courtrooms in the US had race biases. And again, it comes down to what actual training data was used, what were the audits done, and I think there are many more. Look at Facebook. Originally, they had human editors curating trending news stories, and the human editors were accused of having political biases. So they rolled out an algorithm to curate the trending news story, and it did not have political biases. They tested for it, and they rolled it out. But what they didn't test it for was something like, can it detect fake news? And so some of these things are bound to happen. I think the companies that are deploying these algorithms need to recognize that they're being deployed in social settings. And so they cannot evaluate them very narrowly. Something like, what is its prediction accuracy? Can it predict who will succeed at workplace really well? And just only focus on these narrow technical considerations. They also need to recognize social factors and actually, like I said, audit for some of these things like bias and fairness and so on. So some of it comes down to having a process. When it comes to engineering code, lots of these companies have a QA process, a quality assurance process, where your test person is not the development person. So your development engineer and your test engineer are different people. And the test engineer provides an independent audit of the code. Well, with AI and with data science, we might need similar processes where you have some independent audit of the algorithms as well.
So just to backtrack a bit, that whole garbage in, garbage out sort of, theory, well, reality really. When I look at something like big data, I can find plenty of companies that talk big data and can't even get little data right. I see companies that, thought the data lake was going to be something, and all that meant was you're just throwing stuff out into a garage and hoping to find some value there somehow. I see so much like screwed up data management that it's kind of, it makes me really wonder, like, are a lot of companies even equipped to handle something like, training data, right? I mean, if there's so much garbage out there now, what percentage of companies you think will actually get the training data thing right?
It's going to be low. I think there are a lot of companies that are trying to do things with machine learning who haven't even got a firm hold over just basic analytics. And so I think that's going to be a problem. And I think there will be many missteps along the way. Lots of startups, lots of companies that are trying to do this will do that. But I think companies of a certain size whose algorithms are already being used by many people, or whose products are being used by millions and millions of people, I think those larger companies have to kind of first take action here and lead the way and sort of create a process around this. I think the smaller companies and the non-tech companies who are just getting started, they will eventually catch on. But it's the leading companies, the Googles and the Facebooks, even the banks. I think these large companies have to really step up first.
Do you think that there will be some black box from a vendor that'll be able to, kind of streamline some of these things?
I'm not sure. It could happen, but I'm not sure. I think what is needed certainly is a solution that can help companies that are deploying cutting edge AI to make important social or managerial decisions, for them to be able to ask questions around interpretability of their algorithms. Can you explain why the algorithm makes the decisions it does? Has it been tested for fairness and so on? I think certainly there will be a marketplace built around this. Will that come in the form of a black box algorithm that will run all these tests and certify your code? Maybe, may not be. Will it be a consulting kind of service? Possibly. We'll have to see how it shakes up. But I think some of the early steps might be for these larger companies to take action. And eventually, as a market builds around us, we'll start to see whether we have consulting companies coming in and helping out, or is it more of a product kind of solution.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.